Picture it in your mind. It's game night. You and your friends have just been told of a dragon sitting on a hoard of gold up in the mountains, and on top of that, its lair is in an ancient dwarven hold. Everyone is excited. Not 15 minutes later, the party is unanimous. That gold belongs to them, and no dragon is gonna stop them. But the DM warns the party the way is long, treacherous, filled with danger at every turn. The party doesn't care. The journey is worth the risk, they say. They reaffirm their decision to chase the gold, and the DM looks confused. They throw a couple of really tough combat encounters at the party, hoping it will slow them down, but the encounters are spread out across days, so they have all the resources. In fact, the party levels up once or twice, making the remaining fights even easier. The DM tries to have the party track rations, but rations are dirt cheap. The party buys 100 or so and forgets about it in a week. The DM gets exasperated, angry that they can only slow down their party for a couple of sessions at most. The DM doesn't know what to do because their table is playing 5e. Howdy folks, Gelatinous Rube here. Welcome back to a 5e Retrospective, an ongoing series setting the record straight on 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Today we're talking the exploration pillar of 5th edition. How was it? Did it add to the game? Did it have to be added to the game? Did it exist in the first place? We're going to start off with the rules labeled as exploration focused, moved on to some clarifications on what exploration play is not, and wrap up with what real exploration-focused play looks like. But before we get to all that, I just wanted to let you folks know we're running a contest to grow the channel. Check the description, and stick around to the end of the video to hear about it. Alright, back to it. I'm going to lay out the point of this video in advance. I want no looks of confusion on our tour through the current D&D rulebooks. Here it is. 5e does not support exploration-focused play. Every rule examined, every comparison drawn, and all analogies written will circle back to this point. No matter how much people use sneaky definitions or point to rules they thought everyone was unawares of, I will prove to y'all in no uncertain terms, there is no exploration pillar in 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons. Now that I've got you all riled up, into the thick of it we go. Now, the rules 5th edition labels as exploration fit into about 6 categories. 1. Hex sizes. 2. Travel speeds. 3. Food and water. 4. Foraging and skills. 5. Weather. And 6. Chases. We're gonna go through each and every one. Did y'all know that the DMG recommends dividing your campaign territories into hexes? And did y'all know those hexes can represent smaller or larger sizes of your campaign? 24-mile hexes usually represent a day's travel, whereas 6-mile hexes will represent about 2 hours worth of travel. Speaking of travel times, your group can choose to travel faster or slower, where faster speed will cost you points of exhaustion, normal speeds will cost your passive perception, and slow speeds will help keep you from getting jumped at the expense of not getting anywhere. Everyone following along so far? Do these exploration rules sound fun? Well, if not, your jaw will just about hit the floor when you discover you have to eat and drink in order to avoid death. Well, to avoid points of exhaustion, which allows you to avoid the death said exhaustion will cause. Good going, Crawford. No cooking mechanics, mind you. No benefits for eating and drinking, just avoiding a penalty. I think they wrote up a cook feat somewhere around Tasha's. Chef, there it is. Speaking of food, there's a little bit of a minigame without a mechanic when it comes to getting lost, getting surprised, and foraging for food. If you're not moving at a slow pace, you take a -5 penalty towards passive perception. Foraging requires a check, but you can't remain alert to danger while you do so. Successful checks retain more food based off your wisdom modifier, but perception requires your wisdom, so high wisdom characters are split between securing food or keeping a watch for the party. Hey, there's the bones of a system here. You can also get lost in the wilds. Failing a survival check gets you lost for 1d6 hours, after which you can repeat the check. No challenges or encounters build off this mechanic. Weather in 5th edition involves a roll to see whether it's hotter or colder than normal, wind, and precipitation. Hot or cold weather can cause exhaustion. Wind makes it harder to use ranged attacks or fly, and light or heavy obscurement come about through the use of precipitation. Needlessly complicated, doesn't feature any magical results or really anything cool, no clear procedures for severe or inclement weather, and no biome-specific weather effects beyond mentioning strong winds in the desert can produce a sandstorm. Granted where credit is due, I would have expected them to miss that along with everything else. Now the 5th edition Wilderness Kit, which by the way is missing a tremendous amount of content we already listed, has some meager rules for resolving a chase. I'm not exactly sure what chases have to do with exploration, but I'm willing to keep an open mind. First, the DM has to decide the distance, the scale of distance covered in a round, and commit to tracking them. Next, everyone rolls initiative. The following steps are then repeated until the DM decides the chase is over. Roll for a complication. Everyone moves and takes an action on their turn, and then you move on to the next round. There's really no difference between this mode and combat, it's just a procedure for determining what happens when everyone runs. It's worth noting these chase rules, complications, and such are specific to a forested or otherwise green biome. Adding to my confusion earlier, why is this in the Wilderness Kit, the Exploration Kit? And just to wrap up 5th edition's commentary on exploration, I know some modules include extra details about traveling through the campaign map, and I'll tell you right now, they don't matter. There is no bombshell waiting in those books that somehow wasn't included in the Wilderness Exploration Kit. If you think there's anything in those modules or that I've discussed so far that constitutes a mode of play, it's time to start discussing what exploration is not. You all have to be careful when identifying whether a system supports a given mode of play. In video games, it's clear. A system exists if you all can play through it. But in tabletop RPGs, you'll come across a great deal of text which does not have anything to do with the game. It's entirely feasible your player's handbook or any splat books to follow include more useless text than systems you can actually use to game. A lot of companies rely on this dishonest practice of key jingling to pad their rule books and produce a sense of a game rather than an actual game. We must be wary and evaluate text over labels. This part of the discussion parallels our very first video, an in-depth discussion of one-to-one time. I said back then, and I do maintain now, that when we write a rule, it's to change how the game is played. Labeling a rule as exploration does not make an exploration system. It has to be playable, offer advancement of one form or another. Your choices have to loop to produce better outcomes, more advancement to handle more difficult challenges, and make easier challenges a comparative breeze. It's not enough to just avoid penalties. The system has to reward its use at the table. Now that all probably sounds abstract, but lucky for us we have a clear example of how to design a mode of play. If y'all ask me 3 ways to make combat non-functional in 5th edition, I'd have a pretty easy set of answers, a pretty easy combination at least. Take away hit points, initiative, and damage rolls. Combat uses these structural elements to provide mediated success and failure, challenges we can spend game time on. Matt Colville said it best.
And as a result, eventually, in both instances, it's going to be roll, miss, roll, hit, roll damage, roll damage, it doesn't die, roll damage, it doesn't die, roll damage, it does die. Each unit also has...
Combat also has not 1, but 3 or 4 giant books of challenges, plus the third-party nonsense, ready to deploy at any time. On top of that, these challenges list experience gain, along with potential other forms of advancement that will make you better at combat over time. Where is the parallel for exploration? There is no mediated success in exploration, because states of success are just considered you reached your destination. The meager mechanics we do have just ask you to spend valuable in-game time avoiding penalties, which is why people ignore it. Combat takes ages in 5th edition, and we already know the players aren't going to let themselves starve to death, so they skip it, and nothing changes about the game. Can y'all say the same for combat? I doubt it. On a related note, I sniped at the chase rules of 5e's Wilderness Kid earlier, so y'all know what's coming. I need to propose something better, right? Well, I'm already building 3 other role-playing games, plus a zine. There are limits to my creative powers, my artistry, you know. The script would have to be at least 3 times as long if I just remade everything I criticized, but I can give you folks my metric for good chase rules. It's pretty simple, but I guarantee y'all weren't expecting my standard to be as follows. Can you run a dogfight with these rules? Pretty weird at first glance, right? Dogfights in a fantasy game? Well, dogfights are, historically speaking, a chase focused on outmaneuvering your opponent. It would be impractical to worry over much about exactly how much movement y'all were spending, exact positioning, tracking 6-second rounds. Drilling down on exact positioning and movement rates tends to separate groups of people, parties, and leads to chases having no real advantages over standard combat encounters. You should only use a chase. This is our parallel with exploration. You can only use a chase if it better represents the encounter over standard combat, if it doesn't take up valuable time at the table, if you don't miss it. It shouldn't be there. Alright, enough hypotheticals. Let's talk what makes an exploration system. I have a short list here, and I'll expound a little on each. This is going to be a full video elsewhere, so I'm not going to hand you folks an exploration system today at the very least. First up, moves or activities to choose from. Second, class or other advancement lock benefits for activities and unique moves. Third, success states beyond reaching your destination. Fourth, loot. Fifth, we've got environmental modifiers on exploration itself. And sixth, substantial modifiers on other modes of play. Let's talk advancement in exploration. The gameplay of combat is defined by the choices you're permitted to make by the system. If we want exploration to be a mode of play comparable to combat, we could introduce decision points between setting off for a journey and reaching your destination. Maybe there is an element or role your character can specialize in. One character might be better at setting up camp, whereas another might specialize in keeping good spirits and cheering up the party even in dismal conditions. Different means of speeding up travel are nice, but travel speeds alone don't really make for a good system. Choosing different routes is nice, but is usually too granular a decision to support in-game, and there's rarely a good reason for routes to deviate substantially from one another. What y'all can do is make different boons during and even after travel available based on a matrix of stops made along the way, character customization, and good rolls or decisions during the course of travel. More on that later. The success state of travel should not just be you arrive at your destination. That should probably be the reward for getting about half of travel, about half of your rolls or your checks or whatever have you correct. In the meantime, success should net you loot, experience, boons, and some other means of advancing your character in the game. I took a note from video games, which as a medium has spent the past 50 years advancing in complexity and quality, whereas tabletop games have gotten more shallow and less intelligent over those same years. If you're playing Skyrim or Monster Hunter, traveling the world just walking around provides you with loot. Alchemical reagents, crafting items, straight up gear are laying around waiting for you to pick them up. Exploring is one of the easiest ways to pick up new loot for sale or use. Your party should absolutely roll into town with an armful of beaver pelts or axe beak heads to pawn off. Unique inks or magical creatures ought to present themselves to the party, ripe for the picking. If spells in a Vancian setting are these kinds of thought demons sitting in your head until expelled, you should be able to find them out in the world. Who says otherwise? Part of making a good exploration system is making expeditions feel different from one another. Most, if not all, expeditions should have modifiers or special objectives which change the conditions of the test. Weather is a pretty good example of environmental modifiers during travel. Precipitation, fog, and other material clouds, we could say, like sandstorms, provide an easy means of obscuring line of sight or restricting it past a specific distance. But I don't want y'all to stop there. Weather can do a lot more. Consider we play fantasy or sci-fi games. We can get pretty exotic with environmental effects. There are magic items in 5th edition. Why don't they gain new features or deactivate or get stronger? Anything when corresponding weather events appear. In the fantasy post-apocalypse, earthquakes, tornadoes, volcanic eruptions, and magical weather events of all sorts should be something of a regular occurrence. These don't just have to affect exploration encounters, mind you. Consider your party is attacking a seaside village. If the village is shrouded in mist, haunting fog, your party has easy cover for their approach. They can hide after each encounter. The DM has an excuse to use chase rules given both the village's structure and the obscuring nature of mist. Imagine now that the mist is magical, the souls of the dead appear within or something like that. Your party will be adding to said souls every hour. The lack of these tie-ins or combinations between different modes of play adds to why I think 5e doesn't actually support exploration. Real games make nearly every interaction with a given mode of play a potential plot hook or fodder for all of the other ways in which you'll play. 5th edition does none of this. The exploration pillar does not exist. Well, folks, it's about time to head out. I hope you've enjoyed our deep dive on exploration in 5th edition. I hope you've come away confident, knowing the world's greatest role-playing game failed on a major aspect of the fantasy milieu. And the next time someone links you a Reddit post or something about how you really can run 5th edition exploration rules as written, you can toss this video right back in their face. Next week's video will return to rules you may have missed, but in the meantime, as mentioned, we're running a contest here. All you have to do to enter is link your favorite video of ours on social media with the hashtag gelatinous_rube, and we'll give you all a signed copy of Seven Willows, along with all of its accessories, and a set of 7 dice from the wonderful artisans at 3 Fates Dice, should you win. I'll be selecting 2 winners from all contestants. And what is Seven Willows? Well, speaking of exploration, it's a small RPG zine about exploring the wilds and treating exploration as a mode of play. You can play it either as its own RPG or as an adventure for 5th edition, Pathfinder 2nd edition, or various OSR games, and y'all can find it on Kickstarter. The Kickstarter is less than $100 away from funding at the time of this recording, and we'd love y'all to push it to the finish line. Music was provided by Blue Dot Sessions, and a very hearty thank you to Mariana for the art.